So for the sake of clarity, a quick point on terminology. So the EU legal text refers to self-hosted address, but this means exactly the same thing as the term unhosted wallet used by the FATF. And it also refers to crypto asset service providers to refer to entities providing services in crypto that are authorized to provide these services under MiCA. So the crypto as a service provider are only those that are authorized by MiCA to operate in the EU, but they mean the same thing as virtual as a service providers for the FATF. So I would like to give you an overview of the overall AML CFT framework, because this is also relevant for the requirements imposed for the requirements in relation to unhosted wallet. So as you know, the TFR is part of a bigger package on the AML CFT reform. CFT's framework reform. So this package was adopted in July 2021 and is intended to overhaul the current framework, which is based on the IMLD5, and to create a new IML authority. So this takes time. The negotiations on most of these files are still ongoing, but the TFR was fast-tracked because it could be enacted as a standalone legislative act. It needed to be linked to the new framework. So it was agreed by the co-legislator that it would be linked to the existing IMLD5 and to the MiCA, which was being negotiated in parallel. So this was to avoid unnecessary delay. However, in the moment the TFR was recasted, so modified and updated to take into account the crypto dimension, the IMLD5 was not. So the current IMLD5 was only applying to certain categories of crypto as a service providers. Now we had a new regulation for all categories of crypto as a service providers, which would become obliged entity under TFR. Therefore, it was needed to also introduce targeted changes to the IMLD5 to ensure it would apply to the whole universe of crypto as a service providers, and also to ensure it would be updated to take into account more specifically of crypto risks. So in the IMLD5 today, through the negotiations of the TFR, we introduced amendments dealing with so-called VASP due diligence, CASP due diligence, and unhosted wallets. So those there are also requirements referring to unhosted wallets in the IMLD5. To clarify a bit the scope of the rules covered by the TFR. As you know, probably you know already, all crypto transfers are covered without any threshold. So the only important thing is that there is one crypto as a service provider or an intermediary involved. Therefore, all transfers from CASP to CASP are covered, but also transfers from CASP to self-hosted wallets or vice versa, but with a special regime, because of course, from CASP to self-hosted wallets, there is no communication channel, so there is no proper travel rule, there is no information traveling from one to another, but the only requirement is that these information are recorded and made available to competent authorities. So we have also special requirements for first-party transfers with self-hosted wallets above a certain threshold of 1,000 euros, and we will see it in a moment. And the regulation fully excludes transfers that are peer-to-peer, so self-hosted to self-hosted. Okay, so as I mentioned, the TFR includes also amendments, targeted amendments to the IMLD5, and both deal with requirements for self-hosted wallet, but the logic behind these two acts is different. So the TFR mainly deals with information obligations. So this is a second layer to the IML CFT rules dealing with due diligence. It does not replace it, but it adds a layer of traceability. So it's basically rule-based. There is no exceptions, no exception based on risk. Normally, the rules apply to all transfers. And all these requirements would be clarified by EBA guidelines, which would be published a bit before the date of application. So it would be, they should be available 1 year after the entry into force, while the date of application will be 18 months after the entry into force. So regarding the IMLD5, on the contrary, is not so much about information obligations, so what information you should obtain regarding a transfer, but is more about identifying and assessing the risk connected to a specific transfer, and also applying adequate due diligence measures. So it's really important also to avoid a tick-the-box approach. So it's not enough to know who's the person receiving the transfer. You also need to do this due diligence on top if some high-risk factors are identified. So the so-called red flags concerning the transaction itself, the geographical risk. There are in the current IMLD5 already certain type of risk factors. The EBA guidelines will further specify how this should be applied in the context of crypto. So and maybe this, if there are some questions, we can see more in details later. But if there is, because it can be a bit confusing, but basically the IMLD5, as it stands now with these changes, will be repealed when the IMLR and the IMLD6 will enter into force, which means that all these requirements will have to be reproduced in the new IMLR. But for the time being, we have a sort of interim regime. So zooming in the TFR, what CASP are expected to do and how they should apply the travel rule to self-hosted wallet. So basically, there is, you can see in the left column, the obligation required from CASP. So they should first obtain and collect and record the information. What information? The information on the originator and the information on the beneficiary. So there are different set of information for both, but they are not required to. They are required to verify the information, of course, regarding to their customer, and the information on top of this, when it's the case of the Unhosted wallet, they should also verify the information regarding to the self-hosted wallet, but only in case this self-hosted wallet belongs to their own clients. So this verification through the proof of ownership that we will see later in the next session, I understand, will be limited to first-party transfers, and there is also a threshold for proportionality reasons of 1,000 euros. The transmission of data, as mentioned, is not required, of course, because there is no communication channel with self-hosted wallet, but information must be made available to the competent authorities. So there are also two different situations we can distinguish. One is the situation where the transfer is done from the CASP to the self-hosted wallet. In this case, the full set of information on the originator and the beneficiary is required before executing the transfer. So in this case, if the beneficiary is a self-hosted wallet, the information required would be the name and the DLT address. That's it. Then when it's about a transfer incoming to the CASP from a self-hosted wallet, in this case, the logic would be that if there are some information missing or the information is incomplete, in principle, the CASP should decide on a risk-sensitive basis whether to execute and reject the transfer. And this is here you can see the reference to these articles mentioned here. So this is the case of outgoing transfers. And this is the case of incoming transfers. So although there is a requirement to hold this information on both originator and beneficiary, it may not be possible to know whether the counterparty is a self-hosted wallet or is an unsupervised entity. So in this case, the Article 17 would apply with the risk-based follow-up actions. Now, regarding the IMLD5, the IMLD5 is the basically the basic IML regime that always applies. So the travel rule is complementary to this and should not replace the normal due diligence process. So the new article 19 of the IMLD5, which was introduced with the TFR, requires CASP to first identify and assess risk. So they need to have adequate policies and procedures for that purpose. And then they need also to adopt risk-based mitigating measures to manage the risks related to self-hosted wallets and also comply with targeted financial sanctions. And in this article, verification, identification and verification through proof of ownership is indicated as one possible risk-based mitigating measures. Sorry, and is not the only one. So there are also other type of due diligence measures that can be undertaken, and all these will be based on the identification of a high risk situation. The EBA guidelines, which will be developed in this case 18 months after the entry into force, will clarify which criteria and means can be used for the verification of a self-hosted wallet, and also clarify other measures of enhanced due diligence, which may include, for example, the know your transaction, blockchain analytics, or other type of enhanced monitoring. So we are almost at the end of the presentation. So I just wanted to give you an overview of how we got to this text. But I would like to ask Anna how many minutes I have left.
Around 3 minutes. But it's fine.
Okay.
It's fine. You can go over a little bit.
No, it's fine then. So this is basically a comparison of the different models that have been considered during the negotiation. So we started with the clash between the Council and the Parliament regarding verification, whether or not there should be a verification requirement for self-hosted wallets. So both Council and Parliament agreed that the transfers to self-hosted wallets or from self-hosted wallets should be covered by the travel rule in terms of obligations for collecting the data and making them available to competent authorities, but there was a disagreement on the extent of the verification of the information collected. So basically, the problem we saw that the Council didn't have any verification requirements. So basically, the problem we saw there was that all this data that were collected by the CASP would be unverified. So there could be inaccurate information sent through the STR, the suspicious transaction reports, to competent authority, which would take could lead potentially to a waste of time and resources, because all this data could be completely incorrect. So this would create, in the view of the Parliament, a blind spot in the regulated world, where all these CASP would be full of inaccurate information, potentially provided by the clients. No, because of course, the information collected would be most likely collected by the customer based on its self-declaration. So the EP, on the other hand, wanted a full verification, which would apply to all type of transfers to unhosted wallet. But we acknowledge that there were some concerns about this approach, in particular that requiring the verification would probably be technically feasible, but extremely burdensome to the point that it would become unpractical for CASP to perform verification for all type of transfers, and therefore this situation could lead in the short term to a de facto ban of certain type of transfer. No, in particular the transfer to self-hosted wallets not held by the client, because in that case it would be more difficult for the CASP to establish a communication with the self-hosted wallet. So we looked at different existing models, in particular the Swiss and the German model, and we thought of taking, basically, we tried to take the best of the two experience. So from the Swiss model, we understood that it was perfectly possible and feasible to perform a proof of ownership when the self-hosted wallet is owned by the client. So there was actually no reason for not requiring the CASP to verify the accuracy of the information provided by the clients in the case the clients would declare the self-hosted wallet belonged to him. So we thought of starting with this experience and introduce in the EU legislation a proof of ownership, so a verification of accuracy of the information, basically limited to first-party transfers, so transfers to unhosted self-hosted wallets held by clients. This basically would avoid the fact that the verification is limited to this transfer, would avoid a de facto ban of transfers to third parties. While from the German model, we saw that the benefit of addressing the issue from a risk basis perspective. So the German model doesn't have any mandatory verification, but it has obligations to identify and assess risks and to adopt mitigating measures. Verification is indicated as the adequate due diligence measures to deal with self-hosted wallets, but is not the only one. So other measures could be adopted in alternative. You know, the German law doesn't impose verification as the only possible tool. So one approach, the Swiss approach, was rule-based, the German approach was risk-based, and the EU law has a mix of approaches. So through the TFR, there is a rule-based approach when we require verification of a first-party transfers to self-hosted wallets above 1,000 euros. All of them will need to be verified. But we also have a risk-based approach which always applies. So when the CASP identifies a situation of high risk, then it will have to apply due diligence measures. And verification would be one possible tool. So basically, I mean, the benefit of this, although of course it's limited, the verification is limited to a portion of the overall transfer. It's still increasing. In our view, it's still positive, and it has another value because it's increasing traceability, and is also sending a signal to the industry that I mean, that we are expecting a development for the purpose of I mean, the developments in terms of technological solutions to allow this verification. But what's the most important benefit of this is that the CASP basically is able to establish the identity of the originator of the beneficiary involved in a transfer, let's say with the highest possible degree of certainty, you know, and the information transmitted to the authorities are accurate. So as long as the verification of third-party and hosted wallets remain challenging for the time being, from a technical and financial point of view, then the CASP will be only required for those type of transfers to adopt alternative measures. So yeah, I hope that is clear, but the message is basically that the TFR adds this second layer of traceability to all transfers. This is why we have the proof of ownership, but nevertheless, the due diligence, normal due diligence process always applies. So just a quick point on the timeline. So this is still to be confirmed, but and this is I mean, it's we have some estimates at the moment. So we expect the vote in plenary and the publication to take place on March 2023. So the text, as you know, was approved earlier this month, but it was approved in committee. So now in a parliamentary committee. So now it goes through the linguistic check, and also needs to be translated in 23 languages. So this process takes time. At the moment, if we expect March 2023 for publication, this means the entry into force may be late March or April. The application would be 18 months after the entry into force, so around September, October 2024. And this would concern the application, direct application of the TFR, but also the transposition of the changes introduced in the AMLD5, because that is a directive, so it has to be transposed in national law, while the TFR is a regulation directly applicable. And this is also linked to this timeline with the date of application of MiCA. So at the end, by the end of the legislative mandate, so end of 2024, we also expect at least to agree at political level on the rest of the package, so the IML regulation, the directive, and AMLA, and which means the requirements introduced in the MLD5 will be updated in that context. And for information, in March 2025, the Commission should also perform an assessment of the measures adopted for central hosted wallet and see if they are adequate or they need to be updated or reinforced. So that's it on my side. I hope it was clear, but I understand. I mean, it's also a lot of language, so please feel free to ask for clarification.
Thank you, Valeria. Great presentation. I think it clarified a lot. We have some questions, but we went a little bit too over time, so I will do this. We will get back to your questions through email, guys. Or if we have some time left at the end, then we get to them. I think that's best, so you can hear everyone, every speakers that we have, and there are some great ones. So I think we do it like that, and then we come back if there's time, or otherwise we will definitely get back to via email for you guys. And if we don't know how to answer, Valeria will also help there. I think it's time for Harm to get on stage now. He will be talking a little bit about how to prove ownership of those self-hosted addresses as required and mentioned by Valeria.
All right, let's do this. Let me share my screen here. You get my entire screen. Okay, can you all see my screen? All right, I take that silence as a yes. Good. All right, unhosted wallet verification. Thank you, Valeria, for this presentation of yours. You touched on very good points there. I especially liked your slide where you showed where AMLD5 and TFR landed. That's always confusing. You talked about unhosted wallet verification. Let's have a look how you can do that in practice. My subtitle is "The Slow, the Bad, and the Impossible." It's a poor play on words from our favorite spaghetti western. There's also a new way of doing things. And let's get going here. All right. The unhosted wallet verification. Valeria already mentioned this quite well, I think. Just to clarify, given a crypto address, to whom does it belong? Does it belong to a VASP or CASP, or does it belong to an unhosted wallet? It is important in this MiCA and TFR regulation that you know what you're dealing with. A caveat here: you need to know, not guess. So Chainalysis, these help in answering these questions. But that's oftentimes not enough for MiCA and TFR. All right. So the question here is the user wants to withdraw to an unhosted wallet, and then the response should be from the CASP: prove it that it is you who is controlling this wallet. All right. Different approaches, different problems. There are many different ways of doing this. All these approaches have upsides and downsides. The solution we see most in the field currently is screenshots. As you're maybe aware, in the Netherlands, for example, but also in Switzerland, you already need to do this. And what CASPs are doing there, or VASPs are doing there, they ask the user to send a screenshot to the compliance departments, and then they verify that by hand. This is fast for the user to do, but clearly incredibly unsafe. This is just a bunch of pixels. You can make pixels say whatever you want. This is also very time labor intensive. I'll get to that. Satoshi tests. It's automated, but hard for the user. Manual signing, it's automated, but impossible for the user. And there's a fourth kit, the new kid on the block, AOPP, so to say, that is foolproof, but it depends on wallet support. Let's have a look at each different methods and what the pros and cons of each are. So with the screenshots, obviously, the upside is that everybody can do it, right? You have a wallet on your phone, for example. You screenshot it and you email it to the compliance at yourvasp.com. There is no technical barrier there for the user or for the wallet. If it's on a phone, you can do it. If it's on a desktop, you can do it. So it's really easy to get going. It is, however, incredibly fraud sensitive. As I mentioned, you send a screenshot. Okay, who's to say that you made the screenshot now, or that you actually made the screenshot? Frankly, when I first heard about this solution, I was surprised that this was actually an acceptable solution for the regulator. And the regulator is wisening up there. they start to get a sense that this is perhaps not the greatest way of doing things. And I expect some pushback on this method in the near future. It's also very time consuming for the compliance. You get an email with a screenshot or some other way, and then you need to check if the address, a human needs to check if the address shown in the screenshot is actually the address the user wants to withdraw to. This also negatively impacts privacy because CASPs are not very keen on redoing this process, right? This costs them time, thus money to do so. So they probably do this once. You have this one whitelisted address, and then you're done with it. So how would that work in practice? The user says, "Hey guys, I want to withdraw to this particular address," and then the CASP will say, "Okay, send a screenshot of your wallet showing that particular address." And then behind the scenes, they go, some intern maybe compares these things, checks a box somewhere, and you're good to go. The Satoshi test. This is a method in which the user is instructed to send a couple of sats, a couple of the smallest denominator of Bitcoin. I'm using Bitcoin here. It can be way for Ethereum as well. To send a particular amount to an address, and then you can withdraw. The upside here is very easy. You can automate this on the CASP side. You just need to monitor a block explorer, see if these sats come in. It's also cryptographically secure, so you can't mess around with this. There is no way for the user to tamper with the proof as he can with the screenshot. The downsides here are significant. It costs time for the user, right? You go to your wallet, you send off this transaction. You need to wait for this transaction to be confirmed. You need to wait for the compliance or for your CASP to actually see this transaction, verify it, and tick a box somewhere in the system. It also costs money for the user. Currently, the transactions fees are not terribly high, but this user is going to spend real money on a transaction fee. Again, this negatively impacts privacy because the user probably doesn't want to spend this money and time every time. So you again end up with one whitelisted address, and that's just not great for on-chain privacy for your user. It also depends on wallet support quite a bit, actually, because in doing so, you need to be able to send coins from a particular address to a particular other address. So that means that you need to have a high level of coin control. That's what they call it in the space. This is something which is becoming more commonplace, but this is definitely something which is for advanced users only. The flow is really easy, somewhat easier than with screenshots. The user says, "Hey, I want to withdraw to my wallet," and then the CASP will say, "Okay, send us this many sats." I just picked a random number here from one address, and then we whitelist that particular address. There are some variations on this theme, but this is more or less what it is. Manual signing. This is my personal favorite. Or at least in a skewed, humorous sense. It can be automated by the CASP, right? So what the CASP is going to do, I'm going to skip to the flow here. The user says, "I want to withdraw to this particular address." Again, the user picks this address, and then the CASP will say, "Okay, sign this message we've just generated for you with the private key associated with that address." This entire flow can be automated by the CASP. It is cryptographically secure. It doesn't cost money, and it is instant. So that's all great. But no user on Earth actually successfully does this, because I think you nearly need to be a developer or very much into crypto to be able to do this. We had talks with the COSP not too long ago, and they offered this this solution, and they saw 100% drop-off rate on this particular way. Because it's so hard, it negatively impacts privacy of your user. Again, this stimulates the reuse of addresses. So onto the new kid on the block, or relatively new kid on the block. Maybe some of the listeners already know about this. Due to all the downsides and hassle with the other methods, 21 Analytics comes from Switzerland. Switzerland was pretty early in the sense where they needed to implement something like this. We're all the founders of 21 Analytics are all engineers, and we thought this must be better, right? We can do this better. So we came up with AOPP, Address Ownership Proof Protocol. We didn't do this all by ourselves. We collaborated with players in the field. And the flow now becomes much easier. The user says, I want to withdraw, and the COSP says, click this button. That's it. The list of pros is long, can be automated, cryptographically secure, doesn't cost money, instant. It actually encourages green addresses, and it's open source. There is a downside, of course. It depends on wallet support. Wallets need to be able to support this. Currently, wallet support is growing. Bitbox, one of our original collaborators, has support. MetaMask has support. Ledger and Trezor support is in the works. That's going to be released well in the coming weeks. And I actually want to show you how this is done. So here we have simulated an exchange basically. A user, John McClain, is logged in at the moment. And this user has a couple of options, right? With funding or withdrawing to his wallet. So let's go to this withdraw to your wallet page. Again, this is all theoretical, of course. This is for demo purposes, but this is how it's going to work. John wants to withdraw to his own wallet, and then the COSP will say, "Okay, that's fine, but we are legally required to get." You're legally required to get a proof from you that you actually control this wallet. You can do this in several ways. You can do this in several ways. I'm going to show you the MetaMask way, but this also works with other supported wallets. All right, let's connect to MetaMask. MetaMask will pop up here. Wait. Sorry, I have to reload quickly. Click the wrong button, of course. This always occurs with right. Okay, good. With light demos. All right, I'm connected with MetaMask currently, and now this is the button I'm going to click. Sign with MetaMask. So I'm going to click this button. MetaMask will pop up. It will say I'm now currently logged in as a different user, Louise. I'm going to sign this message. I'm going to click sign. What happened now in the background? MetaMask communicated with the COSP, sent a address to the COSP, a signature. The COSP verified that the signature was correct, and then pushed a new message back to the front end. And then you saw my screen change, and then the address has been successfully registered in this case. And now this particular user can proceed withdrawing coins to their wallet. Quickly here, what I'm currently showing you is the back end of our software. You see that Louise Robinson successfully supplied a proof of ownership to us with this with the Ethereum and this particular address you just saw. This is a proof. We call this proof types in our software. We also have the screenshot, of course. This is just, well, I hope this becomes legacy at some point, and we support the other versions as well. So this is how simple it is for the user to do that. The user says, I want to withdraw. The CASP say, click this button. The user does that. The wallet pops open, sign the message, and you're done. All right, that was for the real quick demo. That went reasonably well, I think. I'll want to leave it at that. There's one last item I want to give you, want to part with you with. Valeria told you about this workflow when you need to do what, when you need to do it. We actually poured that into a flow diagram where you can just go and follow what you need to do to be compliant with TFR and MiCA. You can download this at our website. There's a QR code, there's a button, there's a link, there's a URL. Please have a look. I think we found that this was very instructive when talking to other VASPs and having that stuff going on. All right, I'll now stop sharing my screen. Thank you for your attention. Maybe there is some time for questions. I have no idea.
Thank you, Harm. Let's keep the idea of if there is time by the end, then we go to the questions.
Yeah, I see time.
Otherwise, we'll come back to them via email because we already have Caroline here. Hey, Carol, good to have you.
Good to see you, Hannah. Good to see everybody. It's great to be with you. I've really enjoyed the presentations, and I'm glad you've had some time to get into some of the detail, showing some of the practical solutions, because I think everybody's struggling with this issue of the travel rule, and not least with regard to unhosted wallets, because it's certainly not simple, the rules that we've ended up with, particularly here in Europe.
Exactly. Thank you. I think I'll leave it to you because we are a bit short on time. So yeah,
that's fine. We will do the we will do the abridged version of looking at some of the data. So I wanted to take this chance to talk to you, and I know you've heard already today about the rules relating to unhosted wallets as they've just been passed as part of the transfer of funds regulation in Europe, which of course is an application of the Financial Action Task Force travel rules set out in their 2019 and 2021 updated guidance. You've heard from Harm on what good solutions to actually dealing with these new obligations actually look like. I want to step back and think about what does the actually data tell us, and how can you use data about when you're looking at some of these questions and having to make risk assessments and determine these questions of, well, how far do I actually have to go in this case? How many questions do I need to ask, to give you an idea of what some of the data can tell you about some of those questions when you're thinking about interactions with unhosted wallets. So I am going to jump in here and try and share my screen. Can you see that? Can you see that there?
Not yet.
Not yet. Sorry, I apologize. I'm using my
no worries.
iPad, so never quite as simple as you would, as you might hope.
Maybe in the meantime, I will present you Caroline Malcolm. For those that don't know her, I think you're missing out on great content. You should follow her on LinkedIn. But she is the head of international public policy and research at Chainalysis, and she will be, walking us through a little bit of the risks of hosted wallets and maybe some numbers there as well.
Yeah, I apologize.
If you are running into issues, maybe I can try sharing.
Let's try this. I think we're going to do it this way. Okay.
Yes, now we see your screen. Yes,
we're
perfect.
good. We're in business. Excellent. So a little perspective on the data when it comes to travel rule. So for those of you who don't know, Chainalysis is a investigation compliance platform bringing together a combination of on-chain and off-chain data to help you understand what's going on in the crypto ecosystem. We work with a number of clients from both the public and private sectors to help them both, undertake their compliance activities, but also supervise compliance. I think it's a fairly kind of strong proposition from the perspective of, wanting to be able to have the same picture of your activity that the people who are supervising you are actually going to have as well. And so how do we really do that? We take what you can see on the blockchain and transform it into a much clearer picture using this overlay of on-chain and off-chain data. So to give you an analogy, essentially we're a little bit like if you think about using a block explorer, it's like having a map of, the crypto city, but it's a map without any street names or names of the buildings on it. We help you understand what is actually going on there and give you those street names and give you those addresses, the names of the buildings that actually help you understand to navigate through the crypto city. So am I interacting with another crypto exchange? Am I interacting with a darknet marketplace? Am I interacting with someone who's been sending funds through a mixer, for example? And this is all information which goes to that question of a risk assessment of understanding what actually is happening in this space. So how do we actually do that? So as you can see here, we take, for example, the wallet addresses that you can see on the left, and we cluster them together. We can work out that in fact, they're all being controlled by a particular entity. And that entity in this example is Coinify, and they're sending funds to another crypto exchange, Bitstamp, in this example. So how do we actually do that? How do we attribute that information of both on-chain and off-chain information to actually give you a picture of what's going on in the ecosystem beyond just being able to see, a bunch of wallet addresses and a bunch of transaction numbers? And it's really this three-stage process of clustering, identification, and categorization. So clustering is really about working out whether any two wallet addresses are actually connected. Are they being controlled by the same person? And as you might have seen on the slide prior, any particular entity, so a crypto exchange, for example, can have tens of millions of wallet addresses. So it's a matter of bringing those together and understanding that they're being actually controlled by a single entity. Secondly is this process of identification, so mapping those clusters onto real world entities. So again, we've got this service, who's actually behind it? Is it Coinbase? Is it Binance? Is it Bitstamp? And is it any one of the number of players in this ecosystem who might be a registered player? They might be an unregistered player. They could be, as I said, a darknet marketplace. They could be a mixer. So understanding that identification process is what actually happens next. And then this third thing we do is categorization. So understanding of the different categories that Chainalysis has, and I'll show them to you in a moment, bringing those into an understanding, and that can help with your risk assessment of what's actually going on when it comes to any particular type of service. And we do that using a combination of, as I said, on-chain and off-chain data. On this slide, though, you can see the different categories that we'll categorize different entities into. And some of those, as I said, will be regulated entities. There might be exchanges, there might be crypto ATMs, there might be mining pools, there might be smart contracts, there might be decentralized exchanges. So understanding that space. But then also understanding, as I said, potentially suspicious. And for example, if we think about gambling, in some jurisdictions, that's going to be illegal. In other jurisdictions, it's not going to be illegal. So it's important to kind of understand the local context as well. But sort of understand, where your perhaps higher risk activities might be taking place. Are you dealing with a fraud shop, an exchange, in an unregulated exchange? Are you dealing with a darknet marketplace, for example? And then within each of those categories, as you see in that far right column, we're actually able to really break that down, not just to who the actual entities involved might be. So stepping back, and I will just actually move forward through this, just gives you a little snapshot of crypto activity. But I wanted to get on to perhaps some of the, how these actual products that I've just described, how this system of understanding what's going on in a crypto exchange actually translates to actually being used in the context of things like you've come across, or you've been asked, you're a crypto exchange, you've been asked to understand, should I make this transfer to an unhosted wallet? And as I said, there's a number of different ways you can actually understand that and use these tools to help you understand what level of risk mitigation you need to put in place, which is an important part of the transfer of funds regulation. We expect to see, of course, as has already been mentioned, quite a lot more detail about that shared in the coming 12 months in terms of what the risk assessment process should actually look like when it comes to unhosted wallets. But these are some of the things that you might want to be looking out for. Obviously, are you dealing with someone who either has exposure to some sort of illicit activity? Does that mean you actually need to report it? Do you actually just simply need to undertake enhanced due diligence to understand, for example, the source of funds that you're receiving from, or that you're being asked to send to? But also being able to identify things. For example, if you've got a client who's being asked to send funds to something which we've already been able to identify as, for example, relating to a scam or some sort of Ponzi scheme, being able to actually be proactive in that sense and say, okay, this you are sending it to an unhosted wallet. This unhosted wallet has been identified as being related to some sort of scam activity. Adding that additional screening, that additional risk assessment to say, is this transaction one that you really want to go ahead with? So that's another way that you can think about using it. And the ways that we do that, comes down to this fundamental question of what sort of exposure does the unhosted, or what we tend to call personal wallets. I often think unhosted wallets is a bit of a misnomer. They are being hosted, they're being hosted by you. And so we tend to call them personal wallets. But, and the question really comes down to, when we think about exposures to illicit or more high risk activities, is that exposure direct or indirect? And so direct is obviously, the transaction is either going directly to or coming from somebody who themselves has been identified as being involved in more high risk activity, or indirect exposures where, that harmful or high risk activity might be a few steps away from the transaction that you're being asked to send funds to, or that you're receiving funds from. There might be a number of personal wallets in between, but actually, being able to identify both that indirect and direct exposure and being able to do that accurately is really, really important to this question of your risk assessment when it comes to your obligations on personal wallets or unhosted wallets. I know we're at time, so that is a bit of a very quick run through of thinking about some of these issues when it comes to kind of how these kind of broader analytics tools, beyond just sort of the transfer of information that you're required to do when it comes to the travel rule, or the information that you're required to collect, thinking about that deeper layer of, okay, it is an unhosted wallet, it's a personal wallet that I'm dealing with, I have to make a risk assessment here, and what are some of the factors that you might look to as part of that equation. But I know we are close to time, and I know I've already had a lot of very interesting discussions today, so I'm sure there's some questions. I can see them in some of the chat. Hannah, do we have time to go through those, or should we focus on addressing them through the chat box?
Thank you, Caroline. That was very insightful. I think yeah, we'll have to get back to the questions because we are at the time. But I will invite you to help us draft questions when they are about Chainalysis. See how to integrate AOVP into Chainalysis and so forth. So yeah, we will come back to these questions on the email after this session. And thank you for everybody that showed up. It was great to have you here. Very insightful discussion. Thank you to all speakers, Valeria, Caroline, Harm. I think this was a very productive session. Sorry that it was a bit rushed, but it's always like this when we do live events, right? Thanks for everyone that participated and sent your questions through the chat. We will come back to them. We always do.
Yes. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Great to see everybody.